What could a super modern car factory possibly have in common with a traditional, centuries-old winery? Well, it turns out a whole lot, especially when you're hunting for a kind of waste that's completely invisible.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, we really need to change how we think about waste. I mean, usually, right, we think of the physical stuff, things you toss in the garbage. But what if the biggest sources of waste in any business aren't things you can see at all?
All right, let's try something. I want you to picture a winery. Now, if I say the word waste, what's the first thing that pops into your head? I bet you're thinking of things like leftover grape skins, maybe some cardboard boxes, plastic shrink wrap, all those heavy glass bottles, or even the water from cleaning everything down. And yeah, you're totally right. That stuff is a big deal. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's the stuff you can see. The real problem goes so much deeper. So to see the rest of that iceberg, you kind of need a fresh set of eyes. And that's where Alessandro Zeroni comes in. He's a management engineer from the University of Udine in Italy. Now get this, he's not a winemaker, and that's actually his superpower here. That's what makes his point of view so incredibly valuable. See, Zeroni walked into these wineries with his engineering and process management background. He was looking at the exact same things a winemaker sees every day, but he wasn't just focused on the wine. Nope, he was looking at the flow of the work. And when he started applying ideas from a totally different world, he began to find these huge hidden sources of waste. So, what was this big idea he brought with him? It wasn't from the world of wine at all. It came from the super efficient world of car manufacturing. It's a whole philosophy called lean management, and it is absolutely obsessed with hunting down something the Japanese call muda, which basically means any kind of wastefulness or pointless activity. Now, lean management, you've probably heard of it. Toyota made it famous. It sounds complex, but it's actually pretty simple at its core. It boils down to one critical question for every single thing you do. Does this create value for the customer? And if the answer is no, then that activity is waste, even if it doesn't create a single piece of physical trash. Okay, so let's break this down. Lean identifies 7 specific kinds of this muda, or waste. You've got transport, that's moving stuff around when you don't have to. Inventory, having way too much material just sitting there. Motion, that's people walking around more than they need to. Then there's waiting, that dead time between steps. Overprocessing, literally doing more work than the customer even cares about. Overproduction, making too much stuff too soon. And finally, defects, all the effort you spend fixing mistakes. This is the invisible stuff that just sucks up time, energy, and of course, money. So, how in the world do you find waste you can't even see? Well, you have to make it visible. And one of the coolest, simplest ways to do that is with something called a spaghetti chart. Let's check out a real-world example from Gironi's work. It's pretty eye-opening. Okay, so there was this big bottling company in Italy, right? They wanted to get better, more efficient. So Zeroni's team comes in, and the very first thing they do is super low tech. No fancy software, no expensive sensors. They just watched. They stood there on the factory floor and just watched people work. And in the warehouse, they spotted something amazing. They started mapping the actual path the forklift driver was taking, drawing lines on a floor plan. It looked like a plate of spaghetti, which is where it gets its name. And what they saw was this crazy inefficiency. The driver was constantly going past something he needed all the time to grab something he barely used, just because of where it was stored. This tiny layout mistake was costing him an extra minute every single trip. And the fix? Oh, it was so simple, it's almost funny. They just swapped the locations of those 2 items. That's it. And boom, they saved 24 minutes for every single forklift driver on every single shift. Think about that. That's a massive saving with zero new technology, just by getting rid of wasted movement. But this whole mindset, it's not just for inside a factory. The team took these exact same ideas and went outside, into the vineyard itself. And, things get way more complicated out there. So they looked at the process for spraying the vines to protect them from disease. Now, the winery usually just treated every single section of the vineyard the same number of times. It was just standard practice. But by looking at a risk map, the team realized, hey, wait a minute. Some of these areas are way lower risk than others. They were basically over-processing those safer parts of the vineyard. So by switching to a smarter, more targeted approach, only spraying the low-risk areas when they really needed it, the result was incredible, an immediate 18% drop in water use for that whole process, all because they asked that simple question, is all this work actually necessary? Is it adding value? And get this, on top of the water savings, because the tractors weren't driving out to spray those low-risk spots as often, they cut their fuel consumption by a whopping 24%. I mean, that is a huge win for the environment and for their bottom line just by cutting out work that wasn't needed in the first place.
So all of these examples, they really point to a much bigger idea, right? It's a fundamental shift in how we need to think about being sustainable and efficient, not just in a winery, but in pretty much any business. If you think about it, the old way of thinking says waste is physical garbage, and the only solution is to buy some expensive new machine. It sees cutting waste as a cost. But this new lean mindset is totally different. It says waste is any inefficiency, wasted time, wasted movement, wasted energy, and the solution isn't technology, it's changing the culture. In this new world, cutting waste isn't a cost, it's a huge source of value just waiting to be unlocked. And really, that's the biggest lesson from Alessandro Zeroni's work. You know, real sustainability isn't about making some massive, expensive investment. It's about building a culture of constant improvement, where every single person, every single day, feels like they can ask that question, hey, is there a better, less wasteful way we could be doing this? It's such a powerful idea, and it goes way beyond just making wine. It kind of leaves us with one final question to chew on, for our own jobs, for our own lives, really. If you started looking at your own daily routines through this lens, what kind of invisible inefficiencies, what hidden wastes do you think you could find?